This is for educational use only. Our group grants permission for our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines, to use this as educational material.
Good day, everyone. We'll be discussing and introducing the topic, the self from philosophical perspectives. Before we go on and discuss the topic, you must first know the learning objectives. So, the first learning objectives is to discuss the different representations and conceptualizations of the self from philosophical perspectives. The second is to compare and contrast how the self has been represented in philosophical perspectives. And lastly, examine the different influences, factors, and forces that shape the self. Philosophers generally describe the self as the core of a person's identity, involving how individuals think, act, and understand themselves. Many views emphasize the inner aspect of the self, such as reason, consciousness, or the soul, seeing self knowledge as essential to living a meaningful and moral life. In this perspective, understanding oneself comes through reflection, critical thinking, and awareness of one's values and choices. Other perspectives see the self as something shaped by the body, experiences, and relationships with others. The self develops over time through actions, habits, and participation in society rather than existing as something separate or fixed.
Some views also focus on self awareness and consciousness as the foundation of identity. So, how do philosophers view the self according to their perspectives?
For Socrates, the self is essentially the soul, not the body or material possessions. He believed that the soul is seat of reason, morality, and knowledge, and that understanding oneself means understanding one's soul. His famous idea, Know Thyself, emphasizes self examination through questioning, reflection, and dialogue. A good life for Socrates is one guided by wisdom and virtue rather than physical pleasure or wealth. Compared to views that define the self through body, emotions, or social roles, Socrates presents a moral and rational view of the self. Unlike perspectives that see the self as shaped mainly by external factors, Socrates emphasizes inner reflection and reason. The self in his view is not passive but actively developed through critical thinking and ethical living. Socrates believed that the self is shaped by reason, knowledge, and moral choices. Ignorance leads to wrongdoing, while knowledge leads to virtue. Society, education, and dialogue influences the self, but the personal responsibility is central. Each person must constantly examine their beliefs and actions. Through continuous self reflection, the soul improves and moves closer to the truth and goodness.
Plato explains the self from a philosophical perspective by focusing on the soul rather than the physical body. For Plato, the self is made out of three parts: the rational part, which thinks and seeks truth, the spirited part, which deals with emotion like courage and honor, and the appetitive part, which desires physical needs such as food and pleasure. He believed that a person truly understands the self when these three parts are in balance, well reason guiding the other parts. When compared to other philosophers, Plato's view of the self is more structured and idealistic, unlike Socrates, who focuses mainly on moral self knowledge. Plato explained how the self works internally through the tripartite soul. Compared to Aristotle, Plato believed the self is more closely connected to the soul than the body. Aristotle emphasized real life actions and habits, while Plato focused on inner harmony and higher ideals. Plato also explained that the self is shaped by different influences and forces. Education plays a major role because it trains reasons to control desires. Knowledge or truth and goodness helps the self become just and virtuous. Lastly, the struggle between reason, emotion, and desire shape who we became, showing the self-development is continuous process.
Saint Augustine views the self as deeply connected to God. For him, true self is not just the body or the mind, but the soul, which is created by the God and longs to return to him. Augustine believed that self-knowledge comes from inner reflection, meaning that by looking inward and examining our thoughts, conscience, and emotions, we can understand who we truly and are also come closer to God. Compared to other philosophers, Augustine's concept of their self is more spiritual than physical. While Greek philosophers like Aristotle emphasized reason and the body, Augustine emphasized with memory and will as central parts of the self. He believed that the self is divided because of sin, and that only through God's grace can a person become whole again. This showed that the self for Augustine is not fully independent, but relies on God for truth and meaning.
René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and rationalist thinker who lived from 1596 to 1650. He is known as the father of modern philosophy because of his influence of the study of knowledge, existence, and human consciousness. Descartes believed that the self is the mind, specifically the thinking and conscious part of a person. He wanted to find a truth that cannot be doubted, so he used a method called systematic doubt, where he questioned everything he believed to be true. After doubting everything, Descartes realized that one thing could not be doubted, the fact that he was thinking. This led to his famous statement, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. This idea means that thinking proves existence. Even if the physical world is uncertain, the mind and consciousness are real and certain. Because of this, Descartes believed that the mind is separate from the body, an idea known as mind-body dualism. For Descartes, the true self is not the physical body but the thinking mind, which includes reason's awareness and consciousness. The body can change, but the thinking self remains the basis of identity. So, in conclusion, René Descartes teaches us that understanding the self begins with understanding the mind and our ability to think. His philosophy shows that consciousness is the foundation of human existence and identity. Thank you.
John Locke was born on August 29, 1632, died on October 28, 1704. He was an English philosopher and physician, widely regarded as the father of liberalism and a foundational figure in the development of modern Western thought. His work laid the groundwork of Enlightenment values, especially in the realms of political theory, epistemology, and education. Key philosophical contributions: empiricism and tabula rasa. Locke argued against the existence of innate ideas, proposing instead that the human mind at the birth is a blank slate or tabula rasa. He believed all knowledge is derived from sensory experience and reflection. Natural rights. In his political writings, Locke asserted that individuals possess inherent, inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. Social contract. He theorized that governments are formed by a social contract between citizens to protect these natural rights. If a government fails in this duty, the people have a right to revolution. Religious toleration. Locke was a first advocate for the separation church and state, arguing in his letter concerning toleration that religious belief cannot be compelled by force.
Immanuel Kant conceptualized the self through three key lenses. First is the phenomenal self, as an experience casually determined appearance. Second is the nominal self, as an unknowable free thing in itself that grounds moral agency. And third is the transcendental unity of a perception, as the formal universal condition that unifies all our representation into coherent experience. Immanuel Kant's representation of the self are interconnected in addressing human experience in agency, but contrast sharply. The phenomenal self is an observable, casually determined appearance. The nominal self is an unknowable, free reality, grounding morality, and the transcendental unity of a perception is a formal, universal, cognitive condition unifying our thoughts, not a substantial entity itself. In Kant philosophy, the self is shaped by three key influences. First is the empirical factors. Sensory experiences and causality mold the phenomenal self. Second is the rational autonomy, grounds the nominal self's free moral agency. And the third one is the transcendental structure, provide the formal condition for coherent self-experience.
David Hume's empiricist perspective rejects the idea of a substantial, enduring self, arguing instead that it is merely a bundle or collection of different perceptions, linked by mental association with a sense of unity and continuity, being a constructed illusion rather than a real essence. David Hume rejects a substantial, enduring self. Instead, he frames it as both an immediate flux of distinct perception and the illusory sense of unity the mind constructs by associating these experiences with both root entirely and empiricism.
Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and is the best known as the founder of psychoanalysis. He believed that human behavior is strongly influenced by unconscious mind, which contains thoughts, memories, and desire that we are not always aware of. Freud explained the self as being divided into three parts: the id, ego, and the superego. The id represents our basic instinct and desire. The ego is rational part that make decision based on reality. The superego reflects our morals and values learned from society. According to Freud, our personality and action are shaped by the constant interaction and conflict among the three parts, which helps explain why people or something act irrationally or struggle with inner conflict.
Paul Churchland's conceptualization of the self. Churchland builds on materialist philosophy, rejecting the idea that the self is a distinct entity or even a coherent thing, as traditionally conceived. Example of his work is The Matter and Consciousness. Philosophical conceptions of the self range from dualist views of a separate mind and body materialist accounts that ground identity in physical process. Paul Churchland, born in 1942, a leading advocate of self-eliminative materialism, argues that the self is not defined by subject, experience, or mental states as we commonly understand them, but rather by the physical activity of the brain and nervous system. His perspective stands in stark contrast to dualist, rationalist, and phenomenological views, while aligning with other materialist approach, through with a more radical emphasis on revising our understanding of the self altogether. Gilbert Ryle's conceptualization of the self. Ryle, in his work The Concept of Mind in 1949, criticized what he called the official doctrine, Cartesian dualism, the idea that the self is composed of a physical body and non-physical mind or soul that interacts with it. He labeled this the ghost in the machine fallacy, arguing that it misinterprets how we talk about and understand the human behavior.
Horace Merleau-Ponty views the self as embodied, meaning it cannot separate from the body. The body is a living body through which perceive and experience the world, and the self is informed through perception, movement, and interaction with the environment. Consciousness, for Merleau-Ponty, is always root in bodily experience. Unlike philosophers who focus on the soul or mind, Merleau-Ponty presents a dualistic view of the self. He rejects the separation of the mind and body, emphasizes lived experience as the foundation of identity. The self is shaped by the body, perception, environment, and the social interaction. Because the self is always engaged with the world, it is constantly changes not.
That is all, and thank you for listening.